that recording us?
Get up there, you go. Come on. All right, cool. Hey!
That's just your
All
head.
right, good. Ready. So this is the Albany Victory Gardens, and this right here is Nancy. And Nancy is one of the families that lives on the block. All of our gardeners live on the block. You get free space, free seeds, and free one-on-one technical assistance to learn how to be a gardener. She started her first year with a 10 by 10 foot plot. Second year she had a 10 by 20. This year she has two 20 by 20s, and we've now prepared one entire vacant lot for her and her family to produce. So when people come in and they ask folks, oftentimes when they're coming through, oh, do you have a garden here? They say, no, this is our garden. So we have community buy-in at a very fundamental level, which makes our compost program successful. Our compost program, pause it, don't let it just keep rolling crazy.
What was it?
Right down the bottom left, that's your whole thing. Beep, 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 beep. There you go. See,
Oh, yeah.
there you go.
Oh, I gotta pause it, but I went to the next one.
Cool. So you're gonna pause it. Nice.
Gotcha.
All right, so this is our active compost pile. I can put Joey's on there. This goes right there. We'll go back to it. You can see here we have some refuse. So when we pull up our weeds, that goes into our compost. We have food scraps, and we have the already composting material in the back. Even though that stuff looks like it's done, it's not. Has anybody here ever had a compost pile before? Cool. Oh, so you guys are knee deep in it. Did you have the barrel kind, or what kind did you have?
My husband built 3 adjacent, to turn it over.
Yep.
So I don't know how big they were.
What was it housed in? Like a wire mesh?
He used wood to make a lattice framework.
Nice.
Yeah.
No, that's good.
Pretty too.
You?
And wire.
What's that?
Wire, a big wire.
Big wire, yeah, the cattle panel. We use that too, $20 at Harbor Freight. It's 18 feet long, 5 feet tall. You just wrap it, put a little zip tie on the end, and your compost bin is done.
Yeah.
I mean, for $20 and maybe 25 cents for the zip tie, it's a very effective thing.
Except you have to ground it because I've had experience where it blows over.
It depends on how fast you fill it, because once you get it really stocked in there, it's not going to go too far. But the cool thing with those is, once it's full here, you can snip the zip tie and just bend it around the other direction and build the second one right next to it. Keep it walking. That's the walking bin we use. In this case, we are composting between 3,000 and 5,000 pounds weekly of community-based food scraps. Thank you. Yeah, awesome. Cool. Nice. So you see, and that does not account for the stuff that's coming off of our grounds. Over 20 lots, you can imagine that we get a lot of what people call weeds, although most of it is food. A lot of the stuff that we pull up out of the ground is like lamb's quarter. If you're familiar with that, it looks like a weed. It's more nutritious than spinach. It's the first thing to come up out of the ground in the spring, and the early settlers and the Native Americans survived on it. Or plantain, which looks like those, if you're not familiar, you might think it's like going to grow a dandelion or something, but plantain, again, is another highly nutritious and medicinal plant. So we get cuts on ourselves and we're working hard all the time. You can pull a plantain leaf up, bite it a couple times, rub it on your wound, and it will heal you. That's actually where the first Band-Aids came from, was the use of plantain. So this is what our active pile looks like. Go to the next one. And you can see it's quite big. And simply what we do here is we take pallets, you can see on the corner. These are large industrial pallets that we get for free. We rescue them from the waste stream. They're about 5.5 feet tall, and they're 12 foot 3 inches long. I know, because I'm measuring them all the time because we're building with them. We build all of our windbreaks and all of our garden bays are built out of those pallets. And we built this little corral to receive our compost. This is the active pile. And we pile it up. Everybody throws in weeds that they pull out of their garden, out of the walking path. We've created employment in the neighborhood for a couple of people, some kids, and some people who are newly migrated to this area or this nation. And it's great work for people, and people really love to do it and to do it right. You can see that there's no garbage in our compost pile. So that's the first miracle of the 7 miracles of compost, is to have it be trash free, right? So if you're ever working with anybody else, that's where the trash starts coming in. If you're doing your own homegrown compost pile, you feed it like you'd feed yourself. But when it's a multiple person's thing, it's very easy to not sift out, some tiny little minuscule piece of garbage that builds up over time. When you have that, 3,000 to 5,000 pounds of food scraps, to keep it this clean is really quite a feat. So we pile it up in the front. When it gets too high, then we have a local contractor that allows us to use his skid steer. It's like a small loader tractor. And we just flip it up and flip the compost over and keep covering it. Next. And we cover it with aged wood mulch. Aged wood mulch is the second miracle of our compost. So we get this from the city of Albany. When people put those brown bags out at the end of their driveways, those are the greatest tiny, might as well be nuclear biohazards that you could ever find, because they're filled with herbicides, pesticides. They're filled with every kind of inorganic fertilizer and oftentimes actual household trash. So those go down to the City of Albany's compost facility, and they get piled up in an ungodly pile where they're turned and mixed and ground and sifted, and they have compost. And it's actually one of the better composts, the better municipal composts you can get is from the City of Albany. I in no way mean to disparage them. But if you've ever gotten it, it looks black, and it's so rich. And then it dries out a little, and then all you see is a million tiny particles of chemical bags from fertilizer and herbicides and pesticide bottles and regular trash that's all ground up in there. Now, when we look at the aged wood mulch, which comes from their forestry department, which is simply felled trees or that branch of that old maple that came down on the corner, it gets chopped up and ground up, and it has very little use, so it sits. And that would be the third miracle of our compost. Sitting allows these wood chips to age, and they grow microbiotic, bacterial, and fungal activity. They get so rich and dense with all the local strains of all those things that sound bad but are actually really good, and become the large stomach which digests our compost. And no trash, nothing to hurt our composting worms, no chemicals, it's just ground aged mulch. Next. This is what a pile looks like that we keep on hand. Back.
Oh my goodness, I'm
There you
so
go.
bad at this.
You're okay. There you go. So we keep this on hand because the compost facility. I'm getting dizzy. The compost facility. You good? Are you okay?
I think I got it.
Cool. The compost facility is not open all year round. So finding a way to balance access to the resources that we need. So far, everything is free. We're able to go down and pick this up whenever we need it during the season, because for the city, it's an encumbrance. It's a giant, massive pile that's taking up space in their yard that has no conceivable use other than they mix it into the actual compost just to try to get rid of the stuff. But it's a gold mine, and we'll continue to talk about that as we go. So we keep a large pile on hand, which allows a couple things to happen. One, We can get a hold of the stuff when we need it. It's right there. If someone's not around with the truck to bring it on site, any neighbor can go and access that and sprinkle it on top of the food scraps like you saw. A couple peppers in the beginning wasn't a big deal, but I'll give you a shot of our compost dump in a little bit. You can see it can get a little wet. And to balance it out, anybody who's on site needs to be able to have access to grab it and just sprinkle a little bit on. So the second thing that this does is it allows us to further age the wood chips, to age them on site, where they're mixing in with this beneficial bacteria and beneficial fungus. In some cases, we even seed the wood chip pile with mushroom spores so that it can begin to inoculate. In fact, if you left like a 2x4 or a piece of wood sitting on this, or even a piece of cardboard for a couple days, and pulled it up, it would be white with mushroom mycelium, which is very important. Next. This is so you can get like a really intense look at what these wood chips look like. This is a shadow, but it's also, these little white specks are all mushroom mycelia that you can see growing on the wood just underneath the surface. I took all these pictures today before I came here, by the way, so this is all in real time. And nothing too big. The biggest piece is still about, the size of a 50-cent piece, but most of it is broken down, and a lot of it is very fine, which is very helpful. Next. This is our glorious compost station. So the active pile that you guys just saw was on the left side of this. That's the entry into that. You can see that as the pile goes up, as we keep filling it and mixing it. Now these piles are at various stages of completion, and you can see that we've already been harvesting some of the compost out of this pile. Now, we normally have like a front on them. We use one of these big pallets as sort of like a door to close off a bin. But we found at the rate that we're processing the compost, we had been doing it by hand with volunteers or the Summer Youth Employment Program kids from the city, which is really nasty work and hard work. But now by having the skid steer, we can flip it more often, and it allows us to produce finished compost faster, and it goes out as fast as it comes in. And if you have a question, just jump in. I'm not much of like a wait for Q&A guy. I'm a stream of consciousness person. So, sir?
How do you keep people in that neighborhood from throwing other stuff in?
Well, you would have to go out of your way to walk all the way over to our compost pile to throw garbage in. Now, the streets and the sidewalks are lined with trash. In fact, we are figuring out how we can fund one of our neighbors to work full-time, literally just picking up bottles and wrappers and worse.
So where is this then? Where is the compost?
So this, if you kept going this way, you would run right into Clinton Avenue. And if you went this way, you would run into First Street. And if you turned around from this compost wall and looked that direction, you would look right towards Quail Street.
Okay.
It's actually right in the center of the whole block at the end of a city-owned alleyway. So we've been pulling from here already. Next. Oh, no. This is a close-up of the compost. It's not a very good picture. But you can see it has some rocks, and it has some bigger sticks, and it has some fresh stuff people have tossed on there. But this is pretty much what the finished grade compost looks like. This is a done pile. And well, you're going real fast. Like that. That's cool. That's cool. No, God, go back to the machine. It's okay.
I just don't know how to do it.
You can. There's actually steam coming off of this a little bit.
Wow.
Stop it there.
Every time I
Stop,
pause,
press,
it goes to the next
there you go,
one.
okay. Yep. You just got.
Oh, literally,
Then press.
pause.
Okay.
Okay,
Now go to the next one.
okay.
And then press pause.
But, no. Does it also play?
This tiny $2,000 contraption is the heart and soul of our compost operation. This is what allows us now to not only grow compost for our own use, but to be able to prepare it for sharing or potentially even selling to help raise money as a sustainable stream, turning this waste product into a true resource for our project. This is a sifter. And you can see that it's just got a small Honda engine on it. One of these things can cost $25,000 to $50,000 for something this size. It's a little over 8 feet across, and it's about 6.5 feet in length. And all it is a system of 2 pulleys with a spring, and in the center of these sifting grates is a bar that's bent like this. And when it turns it, it's out of balance. Think if you've ever had a wheel out of balance in the car and it's going like that as you're driving down the road. This little thing shakes like crazy, and the sifted compost falls through into here, and the stuff that's still too big, stones, rocks, the occasional fork. I mean, no one's perfect, you know.
Well, the co-op has compostable forks that compostable.
Things that haven't finished breaking down will get distributed out to the end. And I'll do 2 passes with it. I'll bring it back through and dump it on top again a second time. But whatever's left next. This is what comes off of the reject pile. So you can see it's just a couple of small stones, but generally the bigger pieces of wood chips that haven't broke down, a few sticks that made it in. In this case, again, I mean, this could be my wallpaper. I love this. There's no trash. Okay, next. And this is what it looks like up close. So if this is the extent of trash that you're getting in your compost, then you have gold. It's like it's like a little piece of string or something stuck to a piece of wood. But you can see this stuff is too big. What do we do with this? I pick this up and we take it and we put it back into the compost. Because not only is it going to keep breaking down, it's already nutrient dense from absorbing the moisture and the nutrients and the biological process of the detritivore mushroom funguses that are eating the food and using the carbon from the wood to help sequester the nitrogen, and of course also that helps to sequester carbon. So these things are fully charged, activated, bioactivated pieces of wood chips, and they go right back in the compost pile, and that's what helps keep it growing. This is our finished product. I love you. And thank you, sir. And I feel like those applause are due because we've been working on this compost program for literally years.
How many years?
4 years.
Okay, wow.
Our first year, before we started the garden, once we had the first intention to begin the Albany Victory Gardens, the first thing that we grew was compost. Off-site. We found a place, a guy who let us set up some bins, and we started right away. Because we knew that to produce food in those lots, we were not going to be able to rely on the soil that was there. And we didn't know how much we were underestimating that concept. But to get to this, and this is our first year that we have this sifted, sellable compost. It was a lot of hard work, a lot of hours. Most of it was done by hand for the first 3 years. We've only had that sifter on site for about 2 months. And the use of the skid steer is really started this year. So there's been a lot of labor of love, and we all believed we'd get to this point at the end where we'd be able to celebrate this. Can I see another shot? And this is what it looks like. I mean, probably down here where the contrast, you can see the dark. Well, I dug in. Look at, it's when you squeeze it, it becomes firm like a snowball. And then if you just barely twist it, it just crumbles back into its original compost. So if you're a soil lover, this stuff is so exciting for me. And we haven't sold any yet, but we've been picking up burlap sacks from the local coffee roasters that we're going to use as a biodegradable way. Yeah, the most counterintuitive thing I've ever seen is going to the Honest Lake Food Co-op or any lawn and garden store to get your organic compost, and it's in a plastic bag. You know, so we thought that was cool. And there does seem to be an opportunity for some scaling there, because we drink a lot of coffee as a society, and it all comes in these bags. It might be enough. Next. So once we have the compost, this is what we do with it. This goes into, these are some of the garden beds, and you can see us, you know, implementing the use of those pallets again. This tall wall is First Street, and just inside of it, at every 10 to 12 foot point, we got a little half a pallet wing that comes out, and that frames each person's garden bed. And after we did a deep dive preparation of the subsoil, I'm fogging out, we then build our own soil on top of it, the super soil structure, and then continue to top it with fresh compost. So the angle that I'm shooting this at focuses in on our blueberry plants. These are blueberries right here. A blueberry right there. This is a blueberry, if you can recognize the leaves. We've got a few different types of blueberries here. This is our Canary in a Coal Mine garden patch. And I like this because it showed the subsoil, and it shows the compost that we put down before we had the sifter. You can see the bigger stuff in it. And we grow these blueberries there because we have a larger installation, but this allows us to see what's happening. We have all the different types of blueberries that are there. So if one is starting to fruit or dry out, we know what's happening at a larger level in the bigger area. Each one of these sections is someone's garden. Next. And this is what the compost looks like when they're growing in it. And it's just, I mean, it's really beautiful stuff. When we started here, you got to keep in mind that it was just one flat sea of crushed stone that we initially dug up by hand with pickaxes and shovels, square by square, as we moved down the line, preparing one garden after another, with volunteers, community members, whomever happened to be walking by, friends and family. We had no paid staff. It was something that we shared, and everybody grabbed onto, and they wanted it. People just wander in. The fence is not closed off. That's just a windbreak wall. The whole area is wide open. Anyone can walk in at any time, and everybody treats this place like the community center. We see very minimal theft of compost, and even less of the vegetables from the garden. Everybody takes this very seriously. So you can see that this labor of love has really come to fruition. The plants that are growing in it are robust and healthy. We've gotten several crops, and they've got some fresh things planted to continue growing into and through the fall. Next. This is a shot of our blueberry orchard with one of our neighbors. This is Stefan. He actually lives next door to the garden. He's not a gardener. He's a chef. He loves the gardens. He spends his mornings out walking through, helping out, picking up trash, helping gardeners, and he's not even a gardener. He just loves being able to be in that environment. For him, and he continues to express how grateful he is to live in a neighborhood that has this. So you can see these mounds that we planted our blueberry rows in, we continue to top off are made out of our compost. So all of our garden is eating from this compost. And if you see this, what is that, probably like a butternut squash? Yeah. So we call these volunteers. Where we put our compost into the soil, stuff grows. Tomatoes, squash, peppers, zucchini, everything. I mean, you know, we're making it out of food, and food is it's nature. So we always think that that's pretty cool. And last year, most of the gardens that we grew were planted with volunteers that came up out of our compost. We had hundreds of tomato plants, hundreds of pepper plants. Those are the predominant ones.
Yeah.
And several other varieties of
Onions.
onions and stuff, some carrots. All right, next. This is a wider shot of our blueberry orchard, and you can see that this is a highly elevated area that our blueberries are in, and you can see how we've built the rows out of the compost. But what I want you to see is what's beneath the soil, because the compost is it's best made by layering. You know, we throw in some greens, we top it with some browns. Then greens, more browns, ad infinitum. So nature knows what to do, and if you give it the resources, it will surprise you and surpass your wildest expectations. So this is what we call, if it was planted with something different, we'd call it our urban meadow. But for all practical purposes, it's a giant sponge. And if you're familiar with the city of Albany, you know that we have a couple of problems in two areas. One, our dump is overflowing and we don't have any space for it. And our storm water management system is overflowing and we don't have any space for that either. So when it rains, it floods the sewage right out into the Hudson River, which further creates all kinds of environmental problems. Now there's a study, the USDA came out with a calculation. They said if you increase the humus content in soil by 1% over an acre, you can increase your water absorption capacity by 30 to 50,000 gallons. It's quite a bit. We have a goal to hit 500,000 gallons of increased storm water retention on all of our sites combined. So this giant sponge that you see here, anybody ever grown blueberries? No? Okay. They like acidic soil. Okay, so to keep it acidic, how are we going to do that? Now, as wood chips are breaking down, they're temporarily acidic. Has anyone ever heard of hugel culture? Write that down and check it out when you get back to your computers. Hugel culture is about burying wood, big logs first, then little ones, then tiny sticks, and covering it over with compost and planting directly in it. And then as the wood breaks down over time, it continues to nourish the soil. Well, the real problem there is that it will create a nutrient sink that the wood is absorbing as it goes through its process of breaking down. But once it gets past the midpoint, you have something that's internally feeding the soil for a very long time. Next. So what we did here was, here's a cross section. We start out by putting in large wood chips, then we put in aged wood mulch, and then we put in a huge layer of our compost, and we seed the subsoil with the mushrooms, with the fungus, the beneficial funguses, the beneficial microbacterias, and organisms that go in and create this one cohesive matrix of subsoil activity. This is the most active subsoil that you'll ever find. Now, as the mushrooms run through this, that mycelia will help to transport nutrients, oxygen, and water throughout the matrix of this subsoil. And this is all grown through our compost. So this giant sponge will start out with the necessary resources to avoid becoming a carbon sink, while still breaking down wood matter over a lengthy period of time, keeping it acidic and keeping it nutrient dense, which are two things that are hard to find in the same spot for the blueberries. Next. Here's a wider picture. Actually, we're getting ready to develop our blueberry orchard all the way across 3 more lots to the next house here. And this house is where Stefan, that you saw in the last picture, currently lives. Next. So some of the other stuff that we do on site, in the same vein of trying to use waste product as resources, is these trees. And all right, this kid's telling me about all this environmental stuff, and he's out there, deforesting the entire landscape. But this is actually tree of heaven, Anybody fans of the tree of heaven around here? Yeah? The tree of heaven is an invasive species. What I have personally seen as we're digging by hand in the soil, removing their roots, which they propagate from, is that they wrap around the silver maples. Now, the sugar maple is our tree. That's the state tree. And to see our lovely maples being killed, literally the lives are being choked out of them by these tree of heavens, it's sad. But knowing that the tree of heaven also houses the spotted lantern fly, which is an invasive species that requires the tree of heaven to complete its life cycle. I know it's getting information dense right now, but that bug has no predators. And it will eat all of our orchards and all of our short-term vegetable crops. It's an unabashed feeder with nothing to stop it. So getting rid of the tree of heaven is an important part of what we're doing, helping people identify it and get rid of it. Now what we're doing here is all these little spots, we have inoculated it with mushroom spores from various different strains. We drill a hole in it, put a little sawdust with some mycelia on it, and cover it over with some paraffin wax. Now, these logs, which, again, are coming from an invasive species, it's still a resource for us. So we're trying to figure out how we can utilize that to produce food and even to combat the tree of heaven. So these are shiitake mushroom logs. And these poles will produce an abundance of food for our community, again, out of another waste source. We also have bees. These are honeybees. We have 4 hives on site right now, and we just got a very small donation that was stretching out to get 8 more hives. And these bees, out of 2 of these hives this year, we got 70 pounds of honey. Now, if you're in a bee club or you know about honeybees, let me say, if you don't, first of all, a honeybee is the least likely insect that stings to actually sting you. In fact, we were in 8 hives yesterday with bees all over us, and I only got stung one time on my finger, and it's because I grabbed a piece of comb and I squished a bee on it when I had it. So the honeybees don't want to mess with you. They just want to make their honey and do their thing. Since we've had them, our productivity in terms of vegetable produce output has doubled. And that's right from the gardener's mouth. Each person will tell you, I grew the same thing in the same spot last year, and this year I have twice as many, or they're twice as big. So the bees are really helping us, and we're focused on creating more habitat for the bees. Of course, you can see the morning glories in the background. We want to smatter the area with native wildflower pollinating species. Next. And in addition to feeding the bees, we also feed